The date had gone perfectly. They talked about everything under the sun, shared laughs and exchanged glances that hinted at something more. Susan had worn her favorite dress, the one borrowed from her best friend. It had made her feel confident, beautiful and ready for the night. The evening was magical, or so she thought. But as the night drew to a close and she prepared to leave, something felt off. She noticed the way her date suddenly became distant, his smile faltering as they said their goodbyes. He seemed uneasy, shifting from foot to foot, his gaze avoiding hers. "Are you okay?" Susan asked, trying to figure out what went wrong. He didn't answer, just gave a tight-lipped smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. Something was wrong, but what? Susan had always been the type of girl who preferred to blend in. Growing up in a bustling city, she often felt overshadowed by the more glamorous girls around her. Her best friend Laura was everything Susan wasn't. Confident, outgoing, and effortlessly beautiful. While Susan was quiet and reserved, Laura always seemed to draw attention wherever she went. She had the clothes, the smile, and the life that Susan secretly longed for. Despite her own insecurities, Susan wasn't bitter. She admired Laura and loved her deeply. But when it came to big events, dates or parties, Susan often found herself feeling like she didn't belong. She wasn't poor, but she didn't have the latest designer outfits, the kind that Laura seemed to wear effortlessly. That's when Laura offered to help. "You can borrow my dresses whenever you need," she said. Laura had always been the kind of girl who knew how to get what she wanted. She wasn't about hard work or long hours. She preferred the easy way. She had always been drawn to older, wealthier men, the kind of men who could buy her things, not just cheap gifts, but the real stuff, designer clothes, expensive jewelry, the things that made people look at her like she had it all. She was never shy about using her charm to get ahead, and it worked. These men loved the attention she gave them, and Laura loved the life they gave her in return. The dinners, the trips, the nights out, it was all part of her game. Susan was the one who always watched from the sidelines. Laura would show up with bags full of expensive clothes, and Susan would admire them, wishing she could have a taste of that life. Laura knew the game, but she didn't care to know the consequences. She was always too focused on the next thing, the next man, the next thrill. But all the while, she was unwittingly becoming a pawn in something much bigger than herself. Laura had always tried to pull Susan into her world, the world of older, wealthier men, the world where money, power, and attention were all that mattered. She had been trying to convince Susan for months. "You're too beautiful to let that life slip by," Laura would tell her. "Why do you want to live like this when you could have anything you want? All you have to do is take what they offer." One day, Laura told Susan about Alhaji Musa. "There's this one, Susan," she said with a sly grin. "He's been eyeing you for a while now. He's old, yes, but he's loaded. He wants to marry you even, make you his queen. Imagine what you could have, a house, a life of luxury, all the things you've ever wanted." Susan's heart sank at the idea. She didn't want that life. She didn't want to be anyone's possession. "I'm not interested, Laura." "You're making a mistake," Laura said, frustration creeping into her voice. "Alhaji Musa can offer you everything." Susan felt a shiver run down her spine. The thought of being with a man like him, someone so far removed from the life she imagined, made her sick. But anytime Alhaji Musa bought her gifts and gave them to Laura, she would collect them. One evening, Laura got a message from Alhaji Musa, the older man who had been eyeing Susan for weeks now. He wanted to meet up with her to discuss something important. Laura, eager to please and stay in his good graces, agreed to meet him at his usual spot, a luxurious private lounge tucked away from the prying eyes of the city. As she entered, the familiar scent of expensive cigars and perfume filled the air. Alhaji Musa sat at a corner booth, his eyes gleaming with intent. He smiled as Laura approached and motioned for her to sit. So he began, his voice deep and measured. "Has Susan made her decision yet?" he asked. Laura hesitated for a moment, unsure how to break the news. "He hasn't accepted yet. I tried talking to her, but she trailed off." Sensing the growing tension in his demeanor, "She's not interested in marrying you." "Alhaji," She says she doesn't want the life you are offering. Alhaji Musa's smile faded, his face hardening like stone. He leaned back in his seat, taking a slow drag from his cigar. She refuses. His tone was calm, but there was a dangerous edge to it. After all I've done for her, after all the attention, the gifts. Laura nodded, feeling a pang of discomfort. She hadn't expected him to react like this. She doesn't want a life of luxury, Alhaji. She wants something different. She doesn't want to be with someone like you. As the tension in the air grew thicker, Laura shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She didn't want to lose Alhaji Musa's favor, but she also didn't want to force Susan into something she didn't want. Desperation led her to make an offer. Alhaji, she began, trying to calm the situation. If Susan doesn't want to be with you, I can introduce you to someone else. I have other friends, beautiful ones, who would appreciate your attention. I can. Alhaji cut her off immediately, his voice sharp. No, I don't want any of your friends. Laura, his eyes burned with intensity, the kind of cold, calculating look that made her swallow hard. I want Susan, only her. Laura froze. She hadn't expected this, but why her? She's not like the others. She doesn't want this life. She doesn't even want you. Alhaji Musa leaned in. She's the one, and I know it. She doesn't understand it yet, but she will. She will come around. Laura felt a cold shiver crawl up her spine. She didn't know what Alhaji Musa meant, but it was clear that this wasn't a man who took no for an answer. And when he set his sights on something, he got it, no matter what it took. Alhaji Musa's gaze softened as he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, almost coaxing tone. Laura, he began. I need you to help me with something, and it's important. Laura was still on edge, unsure of what to expect, but she knew better than to question him. What do you want me to do, Alhaji? She asked, though she feared what might come next. Alhaji Musa smiled, but there was something unsettling about it. I will give you gifts. One I know Susan would love. Beautiful things, the kind she's always wanted but could never afford. You would give them to her anytime she comes to borrow stuff from you. Do you understand? Laura frowned, confused. When Susan wants to go out, to those dates or occasions she so craves, offer her those things, the dresses, the bags, the shoes, all of it. Tell her to borrow them. But here's the thing, Laura. You are not to wear them, not even once. Only Susan is allowed to wear them. Laura's mind raced as she processed his words. But why, Alhaji? Why do you want only Susan to put on the dresses? You will obey me, Laura, Alhaji Musa continued, his voice turning colder. I'll give you everything you desire, but only if you help me. Laura hesitated, but only for a moment. Okay, yes, Alhaji, she said quietly. I will do it. The next day, Alhaji Musa took Laura out with her to help buy all the fancy things Susan likes, and is sure to borrow from her when she sees them. And when Alhaji Musa dropped her off, he gave her a huge sum of money and told her to keep to their agreements. When Laura came into the house, where she and Susan lived, and Susan saw her, her eyes lit with surprise as she saw the expensive things Laura came home with. Right there and then, Susan had already started picking the ones she would borrow from Laura on her next dates and occasions she would be attending. Laura made it seem as though she owned the clothes, bags, and shoes just as Alhaji advised her to, and told Susan that she can borrow them anytime she likes. Susan started to feel different for the first time in a long while. She noticed the way men looked at her when she walked into a room. Her quiet nature was still there, but there was something else now, a certain glow she hadn't felt before. Her dates were becoming more frequent, and with each one, she felt a little more confident and a little more noticed. She couldn't help but tell Laura about it one evening. There's this guy, Mike, Susan said, her eyes lighting up. We've been talking for a while and he's kind. I think he likes me. Laura grinned. Of course he likes you, Susan. You're beautiful. I told you that all along. The day Susan was supposed to have a date with Mike came, and Laura had made sure that Susan wore the dress Alhaji Musa had bought for her, including the shoes and bags too. Susan looked at the mirror and loved what she saw, and felt so confident about her look. She thanked her friend Laura for always allowing her to borrow her stuff whenever she needed it. She gave Laura a hug and kissed her goodbye as her cab was already waiting for her outside. Susan arrived at the venue Mike had booked, and it was luxurious. She loved the feel, the music in the background, and Mike was already waiting for her. Mike had been charming from the moment they met, and Susan couldn't deny the chemistry they shared. He seemed genuinely interested in her, asking questions about her life and listening intently as she spoke. Dinner was a breeze with laughter and easy conversation filling the air. By the time they reached the end of the evening, Susan was sure he was the kind of man she could see herself with. But as the night came to an end, something strange happened. Mike's smile, which had been so warm and welcoming just hours before, suddenly faltered. He gave Susan a tight, awkward hug and quickly glanced away, avoiding her gaze. The comfortable ease they had shared earlier had turned into a strange, almost uncomfortable silence. "Thanks for a great evening," Mike said, his voice sounding distant, as though the warmth had drained out of him. I'll call you soon." Susan nodded, but something in her gut told her that the night hadn't ended the way she thought it had. She watched as Mike walked away, his back stiff as he moved quickly towards his car. It was only when he drove up that Susan's smile faded, her heart sinking. What had gone wrong? The next day, Susan waited by her phone, hoping for a message or a call, but as the hours passed, nothing came. Mike had been so interested before, so attentive during their dates, but now he had disappeared without a trace. Susan tried to shake it off. It was just one date after all. The following week, she went on another date with a man named Uche. He was just as charming as Mike had been, and once again, the conversation was flowing. They talked about their favorite movies, their families, and even their hopes for the future. Susan felt the same sense of connection she had felt with Mike, and by the end of the night, she thought things had gone well. But once again, as the night ended, something shifted. Uche's once animated face became stiff and distant. His compliments, which had been abundant throughout dinner, were now forced. He walked her to her car, but instead of the warm hug she expected, he offered a quick handshake. "I'll call you," he said. Susan, confused and disappointed, watched him walk away, the same sinking feeling gnawing at her chest. She couldn't understand it. She was doing everything right. She was wearing the right clothes. She was being herself, and yet something was off. Over the next few weeks, the pattern repeated. Every date started with promise. Men were drawn to her, charmed by her presence at first. It felt like things were going well, but by the end of each evening, they would all become distant. They would step back, act awkwardly, and leave with no intention of reaching out again. Susan couldn't understand it. What was she doing wrong? This left Susan very frustrated. One evening, Laura returned home from one of her luxurious outings with one of her sugar daddies to meet Susan crying. And when she asked what the problem is, Susan narrated all of the failed dates she had in the past months and how they all seemed to lose interest in her on the first date, even though they had all shown so much interest in her from the onset. Laura told her to cheer up and wipe up her tears, that not all dates would be fruitful or turn out the way she once often. Susan still couldn't stop sobbing. Laura gave her a comforting hug and promised her that her next date would turn out well and that she would personally sponsor a makeover for Susan. Susan smiled and wiped her tears. A few days passed and Susan found herself still sinking deeper in a sense of confusion and disappointment. Her phone remained silent, and the dates that had once seemed full of promise now felt like a string of failures. Each time she met someone new, the same thing happened. An awkward end, a distant goodbye, and no follow-up. She felt as though she was chasing something she couldn't reach. One evening, Susan sat down with Laura, trying to mask her frustration, but failing miserably. "I don't understand, Laura. Is something wrong with me? Why does it feel like I'm doing everything right?" But they all seemed to lose interest still. "I wore the dresses, I looked the part, but still nothing." Laura listened patiently, her face carefully neutral. Though a small glint of something unreadable flickered in her eyes, she knew the truth of it all, but she chose to hold it back for now. When Susan finished speaking, Laura offered a reassuring smile. "Susan, it's not you. You've been doing everything you can, and sometimes things just don't work out. But I have an idea. Maybe there's someone who can give you exactly what you want." Susan looked up at her, wiping a tear away. "Who?" Alhaji Musa, Laura said, her voice calm and convincing. He's still interested in you. You know that, right? He's been waiting, hoping you'd come around. He's a man who can give you everything you need, the attention, the life you've always dreamed of. Susan hesitated. The thought of Alhaji Musa making her stomach churn. I don't want that, Laura. I've told you before. I don't want to be anyone's possession. I told you I don't want that life. Laura leaned forward, her tones softening as she placed a hand on Susan. I understand how you feel, but look at your situation. The dates have all turned out badly. No one is calling you back. You're stuck in a cycle of disappointment, and yet, here's Alhaji Musa, willing to offer you everything you've ever wanted. The money, the security, the life you've dreamed of. Susan felt her resolve beginning to waver. The vulnerability she had been hiding deep inside her, this fear of rejection, of never being good enough, had been wearing her down. She had hoped for love, but now, all she had was emptiness. You know, Laura continued, he's not asking for much, just a little of your time. A few dates and he will give you what you're looking for. Don't you want that? Don't you want to be the one in control? To be the one who isn't left feeling empty after every date with this young man? Susan looked at Laura, torn between her morals and the reality she was facing. She had always prided herself on not being swayed by material things, but now she felt like she was running out of options. A few days later, Susan tried again. She went out with another man, a different face, another chance for something new. But as the evening wore on, the same thing happened. The conversation started well, but by the end of the night, he had become distant, uncomfortable. He gave her a half-hearted goodbye, and Susan could feel it. The same coldness, the same rejection. That night, she returned home feeling defeated. Laura was waiting for her, watching her with a knowing look. You see? Laura asked gently. This is what I mean, Susan. No one is really interested in you for who you are. They see you as an image, not a person. But Alhaji Musa sees you differently. He could be everything for you. You just have to give him a chance. Susan felt the weight of Laura's words. She didn't want to go down this path. She didn't want to be with someone like Alhaji Musa. But what other choice did she have? She was tired, so tired of trying and failing. After a long silence, Susan finally spoke. Okay, I'll do it. I'll meet him. But this doesn't mean I'm giving up everything I believe in. Laura, I'm just trying to something new. The next day, Laura made the call to Alhaji Musa. When he heard that Susan was finally willing to meet him, his excitement was palpable. He agreed to a date and Laura quickly set it up. Susan reluctantly agreed to meet Alhaji Musa, despite her discomfort. When she arrived, Alhaji Musa greeted her warmly, showering her with compliments and attention. He spoke about the future he could offer her, the wealth, the luxury, everything she had ever wanted. Throughout the evening, he tried to make her feel special, recalling details of their past conversations and offering her dream of a life filled with ease. But Susan couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the life she wanted. His words, though kind, felt empty. No matter how much he tried to please her, she couldn't pretend to be happy. By the end of the night, as he walked her to her cab, he smiled, clearly hopeful. Susan, I would love to see you again, Alhaji Musa said. But Susan faked a smile. I'll think about it, Alhaji. Susan said goodnight and got into her cab to go home. The next morning, Susan was on her way downstairs when she overheard Laura's voice, carrying through the hallway. She paused, recognizing the conversation instantly. Alhaji, you can trust me, Laura said, her tone laced with a hint of satisfaction. I told you she would come around. Susan's heart skipped. She crept closer, trying to stay unnoticed. But Alhaji, Laura continued, what did you do to those clothes she wears on her dates? The ones she always borrows from me. Every time she wears them, the guys suddenly lose interest in her so quickly. Susan's stomach churned as she heard Alhaji Musa's voice on the other end, low and amused. Leave that part to me, Laura. I trust my source. What matters is that soon, Susan will be all mine. Susan's eyes widened as she stood frozen, listening in disbelief. And don't worry about the money, Alhaji Musa added, his tone coldly businesslike. Once she agrees to marry me, I'll pay you the rest of what I owe. Just keep pressing her buttons, keep nudging her in the right direction. Susan's heart pounded in her chest. She gasped quietly, placing her hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. The truth was crashing down on her. Laura had been working with Alhaji Musa all along. They weren't trying to help her, they were manipulating her. Without thinking, Laura stormed into the room, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. Laura, what is this? What have you been doing behind my back? Laura turned pale, caught off guard. Alhaji Musa's voice on the phone faded into the background as Laura quickly hung up. Susan stood there shaking, her eyes full of disbelief. You were working with Alhaji all this while? All the clothes? The failed dates? It was all a game to you, wasn't it? Laura opened her mouth, but no words came. She looked guilty, and for the first time, Susan saw the true nature of her best friend. Laura had been playing her all along. Laura was working closely with Alhaji Musa and knew that Alhaji had gone diabolic on her and on the clothes she borrowed from Laura, and that was the reason why all her dates failed and her suitors lost interest in her almost immediately after the first date. Without another word, Susan packed her things, grabbed everything she had borrowed from Laura, and left the apartment. A few days later, she returned the dresses, the shoes and the bags she had borrowed from Laura. She had no more ties to her. Susan found a small quiet apartment to rent on her own. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was hers. She refused to borrow anything from anyone ever again. It was time for her to start afresh. Months later, Susan met someone new. His name was Charles. He was kind, honest and real. They kicked off almost immediately, and it wasn't long after Charles proposed to Susan, and they got married a month later. Borrowing things from others may seem harmless, but it can lead to a loss of self-worth and independence. True fulfillment comes from owning what you have, standing on your own and not relying on others to define your value. Be careful not to lose yourself in the things you borrow, because what really matters is what you can build for yourself. If you enjoyed this story and the lesson it brings, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more. Would love to hear your thoughts. Let's talk in the comments.